I'm Colin Robertson, Vice President and Fellow of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, and we are delighted to partner today with the delegation of the European Union to bring you this webinar on Canada and Europe, Tackling Arctic Challenges Together. The title says it all. If we are to manage the challenges of climate and great power rivalry in the Arctic, doing it together, doing it through multilateral forum like the Arctic Council, is our best chance to responsibly sustain this unique region. At CJAI, our fellows continue to explore the challenges in their research and policy prescription as our government fleshes out its now year-old policy framework into a strategy. For Canadians, the North is our frontier. Even though most Canadians have never been north of 60, we define ourselves as a nation and a people of the North. Our continuing romance with the North is embedded in our culture and continues to inspire our singers, our authors, and our poets. If you have not read The Cremation of Sam McGee, Google it. But the North is changing because of geopolitics and because of climate. Today's webinar with the ambassadors is another effort to address those challenges and to keep the spotlight on the Arctic. Again, I think the multilateral approach works best, and passing the screen to Christian Bergsmuller, Chargé d'Affaires at the European Union Delegation Office, I thank him and his team for making this happen today. Christian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Colin. It's a great pleasure today to open the seminar together with you. It's a great pleasure for me. I've just recently arrived as Chargé d'Affaires here in Canada. I know Canada quite a bit, but I know the Arctic very little, and therefore I'm very grateful today to be in the hands of so many Arctic experts around me, especially our moderator today, Ambassador Hanne Eskia, the ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Denmark. Thank you very much that you took that over today. You may ask, why is the European Union so interested in the Arctic? Well, we have 3 of our member states which are Arctic countries and players, the Kingdom of Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. That means that EU rules and regulations apply in the Arctic. We, the European Union, are a great consumer of Arctic raw materials, and the Arctic affects us, and we affect the Arctic, as we can especially see in the area of climate change. It's also a great personal pleasure to see Michael Mann here today. We go back a long time. I think the first time ever he was a spokesman for Commissioner Fischer-Boel, the Danish commissioner at the time, and I brought him every year a group of 20 journalists from Brasilia to talk to. So thank you very much to our speakers, to the moderator, to our good friends from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute who partnered with us today, and therefore I would like to hand it over to our moderator, the Danish ambassador, who, contrary to me, has a long-standing Arctic experience because he was the Danish Arctic ambassador in the past, head of the Danish North America department. So you are in much better hands with her than with me today. Hanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian and Colin, for your introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be participating in this webinar organized by the EU delegation here in Canada, as well as the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. I look forward to moderating our debate with our 3 great speakers of today. But before I introduce the speakers, I would first of all like to welcome you, the audience, to our webinar. Despite the distance between us and the virtual format of this event, I hope you can hear us and see us. But very importantly, we would like to hear from you as well. So already now, I would like to invite you to participate through the chat function, where you can send questions and comments that our speakers will be addressing in the Q&A session. You can open the live chat function by using the bottom of the top right of your screen, where you can both show and hide the chat module. I hope you will find it. We have already received a few questions, but there's room for many more, and I know the speakers will be holding the time tightly, so we have plenty of time for discussions with you. The language spoken today will be English, but I hope you are receiving and seeing a live translation into French on your screens. And please feel free to ask your questions both in English or in French, as you see fit. So, bienvenue à tout le monde à ce webinaire. So now the time has come to introduce our three speakers. Our first speaker is Michael Mann, the EU Special Envoy for Arctic Matters. Michael has been the Ambassador at Large for the Arctic since 1st of April this year. Prior to this appointment, Michael served as the EU Ambassador to Iceland in the Arctic. And apart from his experience in the Arctic matters, he is also, and we will be seeing that, excellent communication skills as a former journalist and European Commission spokesperson. The second person and speaker on our list is Mr. David Sproul, the Senior Arctic Official at Global Affairs here in Canada and Director General for Polar, Eurasian and European Affairs. David, a graduate from the University of Alberta, started as ambassador in Bangladesh back in 2004, where I have also been posted as ambassador. Maybe Bangladesh is the place where you want to start when you go into Arctic matters. But David has since served as an ambassador to Afghanistan, Thailand, Norway, Libya, and Mongolia. Mr. Sproul took up his position in August 2019 and is now representing Canada to the meetings in the Arctic Council. Our third speaker today that I would like to welcome is our new Norwegian ambassador designate to Canada, Mr. Jon Elvedal Frederiksen. Jon arrived to Ottawa this summer from his previous position in Oslo, where he was the diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister of Norway. In his interesting career, Jon has also served as Norway's ambassador to Ukraine and the Consul General in Murmansk in Russia. So with the introduction of our three speakers, we are now ready to get the discussion started. So I would like to start with you, Michael, my first question. And it relates to the EU's Arctic strategy that was shortly mentioned in the introduction. EU is in the process now of updating the Arctic strategy. Could you tell us more about what is this new framework? What will it bring? And maybe also when we look at the EU Green Deal, touching more in depth on the environmental and the climate aspects of the EU Arctic strategy. Over to you, Michael. And I think there's one that needs to turn off the mic. I think it's in David Sproul's office. So if you turn off the mic, then we will pass the floor to you, Michael. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Hannah. I hope everyone can hear me. Thanks very much to the delegation in Ottawa and to the Global Affairs Institute for organising this event, which I think is very timely and very important. I'll try and be short, sweet and to the point, even though I have got a background in communications and tend therefore to talk too much. But yes, the European Union is working currently on an update of its Arctic policy. The last time we published an Arctic policy was April 2016. And we think that a lot has changed since then. Clearly it has, both in terms of the conditions and the environmental situation in the Arctic. Global warming has accelerated massively. We've seen crazy temperatures this year. We've seen a number of environmental disasters, oil spills, wildfires and so forth, caused by the heating of the temperatures up there. But also the geopolitical situation has changed a lot as well. I think it's fair to say that a number of countries that were less visible in the Arctic are now much more so nowadays. We think of China, for example, and their interest in the Arctic. So I think the time is right for an update of our policy. We are currently, I think it would be wrong of me to sort of prejudge too much, because we're currently involved in a process of consulting on what we should be doing in our policy. And I would urge anyone who's listening today who has an interest to actually take part in our public consultation, which is open until November. We'd be really genuinely interested to hear what you think we should be doing in the Arctic, what we could do better, what we could do more of and less of. The current policy has three main pillars, if you like. The first is clearly climate change, climate action, and environmental protection. We like to pride ourselves, and with this, we share with the Canadians being the sort of global leaders in the fight against climate change. But we have seen an acceleration in the environmental problems in the Arctic since our last policy document was released. Second area is sustainable development, and that means making sure that when resources are extracted in the Arctic, that it is done in a way that is beneficial economically and socially to the people who live there, but also environmentally friendly as well. Thirdly, we look to international cooperation, and that is why, you know, an event like this today is so important to highlight the fact that we do work together with our Arctic partners. So we want to know whether these are still the right priorities. We think that they are still very relevant, but there may be other areas of policy which currently aren't addressed in our strategy paper that could be in the future. So I should also mention we have a very, very strong interest in science and research in the Arctic. We spend a lot of money there, and we cooperate with international partners, and everything we do is underpinned by strong science and research. Canada is a partner of ours in our Horizon 2020 program, our scientific program. And of course, we take very, very seriously not only the opinions and the knowledge of the indigenous peoples in the Arctic, but also their rights and their expectations. So, as you say, we are working on this revised policy document. We hope to sort of finish, I'd say, roughly the same time as this next year. So we have got a few months to work on it, but nonetheless, the work is ongoing very much so. And I think you highlighted the Green Deal. I think it's extremely important. The current European Commission, which came into office on the 1st of December under President von der Leyen, made its biggest priority the Green Deal, the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, to get down our emissions by 55% at least by 2030. And really our new policy has to be in line with that overall ambition. There is no clearer illustration of the problems that we face because of climate change than what is happening in the Arctic. Clearly, COVID has come along and has slightly changed things, but despite that, we still have the green recovery as the #1 priority for the European Union at the moment. Secondly, the Commission talks about itself as the geopolitical Commission. So if we want to be geopolitically relevant, we really have to build this element as well as the Green Deal element into our policy. So, you know, we have our ears open at the moment, but clearly there will be a much greater, even greater focus on environmental protection and climate action in our upcoming policy review. I hope I didn't talk for too long.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I hope that the audience heard that invitation to contribute to the process of updating the policy paper. I know that wish for dialogue and reaching out is a very serious commitment from the EU side. Maybe you mentioned the green recovery, and that's also a topic that we hear a lot here in Canada. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you think this new Arctic strategy or the policy framework could address how Europe works with Canada in the field of Arctic? Are there areas where we can do better, where we can improve our cooperation, where we can work more closely together, you think?
Well, Canada and
can you hear me, Hannah?
Canada and the European Union really are very, very close partners. We share values, we share interests across the globe, but it's nowhere is that more evident, I think, than what we do together in the Arctic regions. So, as I've said before, I think it's fair to say that the European Union and Canada are working together, global leaders in the fight against climate change. I think, you know, that is going to be something that's very, very clearly set out in our updated policy. Science and research is another area that I mentioned before. Canada takes part in our science and research program, Horizon 2020. The follow-up to that, which begins next year, Horizon Europe, will be another area where we're looking for Canada, again, to commit itself to working together with us. We've done some very concrete things. It's easy to talk about sort of, we work together very closely on science, but there are some really concrete projects that we have achieved together. For example, a project on black carbon. This is the soot that's released by factories and cars and ships that really accelerates global warming and ice melt in the Arctic. And we've worked very closely together with Canada. We've had since 2013 the Galway Statement, which is all about working together on the Atlantic and its you know, science in the Atlantic and environmental concerns in the Atlantic, and how that links together with what's going on in the Arctic. We have also a number of projects through our regional policy where Canada has the right to join in with those. We have a number of sort of sustainable development projects which are cross-border, where Canadian Indigenous groups can work together with European Indigenous groups to gain some benefit from this project. And again, the cooperation we had in really spearheading the efforts to get the fishing moratorium in the Central Arctic Ocean is another example of how we've worked so well together with Canada. But now there has to be follow-up to that. We have to put together some sort of scientific body to actually do the research on what's happening in the Central Arctic Ocean in terms of fishing opportunities, once it has been ratified, of course, by all the signatory parties. There are other projects where we can also go further. There are discussions going, I know, between Greenland and Canada on better exchanges between Indigenous peoples, and that's something that the European Union would like to facilitate if at all possible. And again, things like satellites. We have a sort of world-leading global observation system called Copernicus. We have a sat-nav system called Galileo, which is state-of-the-art. These are all areas where there already is cooperation with Canada, or we hope that there will be further cooperation in future years. So I would say, to sum up, we work so closely with Canada already, but there are areas where we can push it further. And that is part of the reason for being here today, to make that clear and to try and encourage the dialogue that is already so good between ourselves and Canada. And hopefully, I can be part of that for the next few years, particularly once we have our new policy on the table, and hopefully once Canada has fed into that process.
Thank you very much, Michael. It seems that there are a number of areas really where we can increase, where we already have a good starting point for cooperation between Canada and Europe in the Arctic, because Canada is a really important partner, as you say, to Europe, and an important Arctic player. So at this point, I would like to turn to our Canadian representative today, David Sproul. We could hear you well, so I think you're on, and you're very welcome to address some of Michael's points, some of the things he raised regarding cooperation between Canada and the EU. But I would also very much like to hear from you. Are there some lessons learned, some experience that you could share with your European colleagues and our audience today on the Canadian Arctic strategy? And it was launched last year around this time, so you're a little ahead of us in terms of implementing the strategy. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah. It's a great pleasure to join you all today. Great opportunity to discuss EU and Canadian cooperation in the Arctic. In response to your question, you will know that our new Arctic policy was co-developed over 2 years in close and inclusive collaboration with the provinces, the territories, Indigenous communities, and others, including academics and the business community. We believe an inclusive approach was essential to the success, not only to ensure buy-in from the various stakeholders involved, but to ensure that they saw their diverse interests and perspectives fully reflected in the final product. I would suggest that an updated EU Arctic policy might benefit from a similar process, with a thorough input engagement with the Arctic EU member states. It might be useful for me just to give an example of what we talk about in terms of consultation and integration of various perspectives. For example, if we're going to address the issue of transporter pollution in the Arctic, we in Canada felt that we needed to ensure that our Indigenous communities are fully consulted so that we understand the perspective, how climate change affects their lives, their livelihoods, seek their advice on solutions, and work with them. In other words, our Arctic policy should be a seamless integration of our domestic and international policies so that they are mutually reinforcing. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think the way you in Canada co-created your Arctic framework is an inspiration to many countries. When you now look at how the world has developed since you wrote the strategy, which would be the most important challenges and opportunities, also the more geopolitical ones in the Arctic region right now, as you see it? And how would you suggest that we go about it? How can we solve this? Both, I was thinking in bilateral tools and multilateral organs. Do we have the right tools in our toolbox to address the challenges, but also take advantage of the opportunities that we see in the Arctic? You're muted, David.
Thank you, Hannah. The Arctic and Northern Policy Framework is an integrated domestic and international policy to guide Canada's federal activities in the Canadian and circumpolar Arctic through until 2030. The Arctic Framework positions Canada to respond to new global challenges and opportunities and our commitment to a strong, rules-based international order. Our new Arctic policy's international commitments include strengthening our leadership and engagement in key multilateral forums, including the Arctic Council. And this includes a new financial commitment to create and host a permanent secretariat in Canada for the Council's Sustainable Development Working Group, and thereby expand investment in the rules-based international order. We would like to enhance the representation and participation of Arctic Canadians, especially Indigenous peoples, in relevant international fora and negotiations. Working to more clearly define our marine areas and boundaries in the Arctic is another of our priorities. And finally, I would mention we would like to see a strengthening of our bilateral cooperation with key partners, such as our friends in the Nordic region and, of course, the EU. Let me elaborate a little bit more insofar as polar science, technology, and innovation, which is an active area of collaboration with our EU partner, where we need to bring polar science, technology, and innovation to our work together. Canada encourages international partners to recognize the role of Indigenous people as well. Importantly, we believe that to encourage the respectful inclusion of Indigenous knowledge into research and ensure that Northerners are involved in the conception, design, and delivery of research, including sharing research results and with communities, is essential. Peoples and communities are at the heart of Canada's international Arctic engagement, and contributing to the work of them, and in particularly youth, is another emphasis. Canada is committed to working with the University of Arctic Network and will facilitate circumpolar exchanges of information and best practices, including international youth exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we all look forward to the establishment of this new secretariat of the Sustainable Development Working Group. It's one of the 6 working groups of the Arctic Council, really trying to find concrete solutions to ensure sustainable development in the Arctic. So it's one of the very important working groups, and we're also permanent representatives of Indigenous organizations are participated on an equal footing with the Arctic member states. So that was a good piece of news. I think many in the audience will follow that directly. Now I would like to turn over to you, Ambassador Fredriksen from Norway. We have heard a bit about the Canadian perspective, the Canadian strategy, also on the challenges and opportunities. I would like to know how you see these from a Norwegian perspective, maybe also in the light of the close proximity of Norway to one of the other big Arctic players, namely Russia, where you have lived and worked for a couple of years, many years, both in Moscow and in Murmansk. So the floor is yours, Jon.
From a Norwegian side is that we live in the Arctic, all of us more or less in Norway. It's a part of our life. It was mentioned to begin with here that in Canada there's a romance with the Arctic. I think for us it's less so. It's a part of our daily life. We have 10% of our population living well north of the Arctic Circle, and 1/3 of our landmass. So I think there is an important difference perhaps between the sort of day-to-day perspective on the Arctic in the Nordic countries and in Norway especially, from the one we see in North America perhaps. And I think we should respect sort of those different perspectives when we talk about the Arctic as well. Our Arctic policy, if you like, or high North policy, as we like to call it in Norway, is definitely based on a set of rules and regulation, both nationally but also internationally. I mean, we're very much married to the idea that we should have an international cooperation on the Arctic that is really ruled based, and also founded on both the institutions that we have, the organizations that we have, but also on good, close bilateral relationships with our Arctic partners. Contrary to what many people think, there is a constructive cooperation going on in the Arctic. The international law is the norm today of how we cooperate in the North. And just to mention the law of the sea, that's a very important piece of legislation internationally that provides, rights and obligations in freedom of navigation. It's scientific research, it's protection of the marine environment, it's delineation of the outer limits of continental shelves, and a lot of uses of the sea. So just to underline that. There will probably also in the future, as has been mentioned here, be an element perhaps of competition in the Arctic. It's always like that when you have an area with so rich resources. But we don't want to see a race, do we? I really believe that the competition should be peaceful, it should be regulated, and it has to be sustainable as well. And that's where I think we share really interest with Canada and with the EU to make sure that this is the kind of development we will see in the future. We will present later this fall also an updated white paper to the Norwegian Parliament on the High North, where we will outline further ambitions for a strong and innovative Arctic. And we will share this, of course, with you and our partners as soon as it's ready, probably sometime in November. Now, Russia, you asked about the cooperation with our neighbor. I don't know if we have any Russian colleagues with us today, but if we do, I'm sure they would agree that cooperation should be based, again, as I said, on international law, which is essential for maintaining stability between us in the Arctic. In the North, we, Norway, cooperate pragmatically, predictably, and I would say neighborly with Russia as well. And I've been a part of that cooperation myself for many years. We cooperate in a lot of areas. It's research. It's of course fisheries management. It's people-to-people's cooperation. It's nuclear safety, it's health, it's education, and you mentioned it. And that cooperation takes place across the Norwegian-Russian border, which, by the way, is a highway. It's a populated area, but people go back and forth over the border all the time. So this is, I would say, the day-to-day life of Norwegian-Russian cooperation in the North, and very much also, if you look at the wider area, the day-to-day life of cooperation in the Barents region, including our Finnish and Swedish neighbors as well. But of course, there is such a thing as security policy, of course, to take into account, and we do see that Russia is building up their infrastructure in the north, including the military infrastructure. And this is something that, of course, we follow very closely. I think it's quite important that from our side and from NATO's side, we are raising our awareness of that. We very much, follow the area closely. There is an enhanced presence also from our partners, and that's what we like to see. Again, for us, it's extremely important that this is conducted in a transparent, predictable manner to keep the tension low in the area, I would say. So again, that's a very sort of brief perspective from our side.
Thank you very much, Jon. And definitely after 3 years sitting around the table and in the working groups of the Arctic Council, like I can confirm the picture you paint of a quite constructive cooperation among all the stakeholders in the Arctic, very pragmatic, very solution oriented. You mentioned your work on the new Norwegian strategy. How do you, in your foreign policy strategic approach, adapt to this new reality that you're also pointing to in the Arctic? Is there a specific challenge or important challenge you would like to point to that we need to have maybe an extra eye out on for?
No, I mean, as already mentioned by Ambassador Mann, obviously the biggest change in the north in the Arctic is the climate change. This is really, really what I think should drive our cooperation in the Arctic. It's changing much faster than anywhere else on Earth, and I think we need to develop all the instruments to tackle that. And this is, of course, something we will address in our white paper. Let me also just say that we are very grateful to the effort made by the European Union and especially European scientists. There's a lot of important work being done in Europe on these matters, which benefits us as well in Norway. And I would also like to sort of thank the EU for being transparent with regard to your new strategy that is coming. The wide consultants mechanism that you are planning, and the open door that you have to talking with other partners like Norway, like Canada. I think it's really, really important that we act very much in concert here. More specifically, I think you will see when our strategy finally, or it's not a strategy, it's a white paper, when it's finally arrived, that there will be a lot of talk about sort of ecosystem-based management. We will look into how we can conduct our policy also in concert with Europe, the Green Deal and so on, which is of great interest to us. Again, scientific research will be in the center of that white paper, and to find out how we can create or shape the Arctic in the future as an inhabitable place, and a place also where we living in the populated Arctic can create more welfare, which is really neat.
Thank you very much, Jon, and to all speakers for sharing these very interesting insights. I hope this has generated a lot of inspiration for our audience to post comments and questions. We have already received some, but there's room for more. And also just want to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar today, so there will be a chance to revisit if there are things you would like to dig into a little further. So the chat function is open, and you feel welcome to use it. I think when I look at it from a Kingdom of Denmark perspective, I really can recognize a lot of the challenge being mentioned, but also some of the ways we are dealing with them, and also the developments we have seen. Some of them have been relating to geopolitics, but the last point by Ambassador Jon is very much this human dimension. The Arctic is full of people living there. We have 4 million people living in the Arctic. And that human dimension is actually the starting point for all policies and all strategic work that we do from the Kingdom of Denmark side. So I'll just like to share one example from our side on this human dimension before I turn back to our speakers on this point as well. It is a cornerstone, the human dimension, both in our current Arctic strategy, but also the one we are also in the process of developing together with our colleagues and friends in Greenland and the Faroe Islands. So there are a lot of strategies coming out around this year. So the concrete example that I will mention is relating to the scientific cooperation that both was mentioned by EU and by Norway and by Canada as one of the foundation stones for actually understanding what's going on, both relating to climate change, but also many other areas. Greenland and Denmark has decided to establish a international science hub in Greenland. And what we have seen is that we have lots of international researchers that come to Greenland and do amazing research. They have a very interesting research article published, but there is sometimes a lack of interaction with the people living in Greenland, with people living in the Arctic. And what we would like to do with the International Science Hub is to ensure that there is a direct link between the scientists and the local communities. And that is important because the knowledge that is generated by researchers, it's important that is communicated and shared with the people on which this actually has a direct impact. And at the same time, it's also important for researchers, we have found, and we have heard from the research community, to get input and inspiration from Greenland, from the people living in the Arctic, on what are the most relevant research questions, what are the experiences that they see that could inspire our international research. So it's always ahead of the curve. So the aim of this hub, and I just want to mention this because it could be relevant for some also in our audience, is to create this very unique and comprehensive platform where researchers can meet both Greenland, Danish, and international researchers. So we hope it can help us coordinating the research, the education, the international cooperation, but also the public outreach. And it's very relevant for the international agreement on Arctic science cooperation that was adopted a couple of years ago, actually in a very close coordination between the US and Russia on how do we limit the barriers to doing international research in the Arctic. It's early days. We hope it will be fully functional in 2022 and bring researchers closer to the Arctic and local communities. So that is one example how you, from the human dimension, develop your Arctic policies and your Arctic initiatives. So I would like to bring in our three speakers on this human dimension. Maybe with the same question actually to all three of you. How do we ensure a sustainable socio-economic development for the indigenous peoples in the Arctic? Maybe I will start in a reverse order, starting with a Norwegian perspective with you, Jon.
Thank you for that question, which is really not a simple one. And it's not sort of, I think, a question that where there's a certain answer at a certain time. The indigenous people in the north, I think, on all continents have been living there for millenniums. So it's really a question of how we as central governments can make sure that the indigenous groups can sustain their livelihood and at the same time, at least in our case, be a successful part of modern society in the Arctic. As you may know, in Norway, the biggest indigenous group is the Sami people, which has its own parliament, which is a consultative mechanism to the national parliament. A system that functions quite well, I would say, and make sure that there is a institutional voice for the indigenous people to be heard. Of course, the situation in all the Arctic countries are different with regards to indigenous people. So it's hard to say that there's one model that would fit in all countries. I think what we should do and what we are doing, all of us, is to have this very, very close dialogue, share ideas and share policies between us, and also make sure that there are platforms and meeting places for the indigenous groups, so that we get all the facts and all the necessary information on the table before political decisions are made. So, and again, I mean, this is probably a process that never ends. It's a continuous process for all of our countries, I believe, and for the EU as well to engage in.
Thank you very much. And maybe the same question to you, David, from the Canadian perspective.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. Just to say that, as I explained, as far as Arctic policy is concerned, the consultation process with our Indigenous and Northerners themselves was very extensive. There was a sense that traditionally, and this has been a very frequent complaint from the Northerners and Indigenous, is that we in the South have not paid sufficient attention to the realities of the North. We do not completely comprehend some of the special challenges they face, nor have we fully appreciated the particular knowledge and circumstances they bring to bear. So as a result, we have tried to integrate in terms of our Arctic policy, but also insofar as our work with other partners, is the concept of Indigenous knowledge. To take advantage of this millennia of experience, as mentioned by, just mentioned, to ensure that we have the benefit of that. After all, what happens and what we do insofar as our Arctics are concerned primarily impact on those who live there. And as part of this too, we in Canada are also very conscious of the fact that we have to pay some attention to their economic development. While it is critically important that we go forward environmentally in a responsible way, address the very big challenges that we face, such as climate change, by the same token, we have to be conscious of the fact that we have to preserve and enhance economic opportunities for our Northerners. We will go forward with resource development, but in a responsible way, taking into consideration the special environmental and other challenges faced thereon. For example, in our work in the Arctic Council, we have helped to develop an economic council, which is specifically tasked with working with the private sector to enhance the very special challenges of working and making a living in the North, some of which, as far as Canada is concerned, are related very directly to the very, very huge gaps and spaces between our communities, the sparse population, and the challenges of providing transportation and communications. So those are some of the particular things that we've had to keep in mind, particularly insofar as our Indigenous and our Northerners are concerned.
Thank you very much, David. And actually, one of the questions that has popped up actually relates to the Arctic Economic Council, so that gives us a chance to get back to that as well. I will now turn the same question to you, Michael, from the EU perspective.
Yes, thanks very much, Hannah. It's sometimes a bit difficult to go third, so I may be slightly repeating what my friends and colleagues have said, but I think it's possibly true to say that in the past there was a tendency perhaps for people to maybe pay lip service to the wishes of people who live in the Arctic and the Indigenous peoples, but I think that problem has now been overcome. I think we realize not only do they have rights and do they have they have whole social systems that have been there for a very, very long time, but they also have a lot of knowledge to share and a lot of expertise that we can really benefit from. So we in the European Union have set up an annual dialogue with the Indigenous peoples. I myself, in my job, I've been doing this job for 6 months, and I've had regular meetings, obviously by video, unfortunately, with the organizations such as the Sami Council. But I think I was talking earlier about this aim of sustainable development that we want to achieve in the Arctic regions. And what does that mean? It's partly about environmentalism, but it's more about making sure that the the economic benefits coming from the development of Arctic resources should not just all be exported from the Arctic. They should remain in the communities, and people who actually live there should be able to benefit from the fact that there is economic activity in the Arctic. It's not just for outsiders to come in and exploit. It's about making sure that the benefits are shared with those people who live there, and done in a way that is compatible with their lifestyles. Now, we have many different demographic developments in different regions of the Arctic, but there are certainly places where there is an outmove of people, and that's something that we certainly want to deal with, and we will be addressing in our updated policy. How can we do that? I mean, it's a word that's overused, but connectivity is a very important thing, and this is all about making sure that people have maybe at 5G coverage, they have the ability to actually continue to do their work and innovate in these areas. So, you know, making sure that the business conditions are there for people to be able to work. I had a very interesting meeting with the business associations from the Nordic countries earlier this week, in fact, and they were making the point that it's all very well to be very focused on environmental protection, but we also have to focus on people's livelihoods. So that is something that, of course, is in our minds anywhere. We do have programs, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in the European Union, paid for out of our regional funds, which are cross-border programs where we try and they're reasonably micro. Some of the European programs can be a bit big and can be difficult to access for small organizations, but our programs in the Arctic are extremely easy to use if you are a small organization. And there are a number of projects where we have provided financing for indigenous peoples to maybe export some of their products, or to set up sort of, you know, links to markets in the European Union and so forth. Finally, a point on Greenland, as I'm talking to the ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark. I mean, we provide about 32 million euros every year in financial assistance to Greenland, and that is focused very much on the education sector as things stand at the moment. And the idea being there that it is important that young people in Arctic communities are able to be up to date with the latest in technologies and in educational possibilities, in order to be able to set up new business and in order to give them a reason to stay and to be prosperous.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good example of the EU engagement really on the ground in the Arctic. That last example that you mentioned, Michael. I would now like to open our Q&A session, and I will be reading out the questions as they come in. And I think I'll start with some relating to the economy, the business sides, because that's really where our three speakers came from in these last interventions. I think we should follow up on what was mentioned on the Business Council. I have a question here from Lee Carson, saying that in 2014 an Economic Council was introduced and formed under the Arctic Council. What is the current status of that body, and is it time to reinvigorate the forum to leverage our new CETA trade agreement? So maybe, David, if you just add on a few things on this Business Council, and then maybe Michael, you can come in on the CETA perspective on that one. While you think about that, I'll just mention one additional question that also relates to this from Francis Schiller. Can Canada and the EU improve services trade to address Arctic challenges with local broadband connectivity and infrastructure? And the issue of connectivity was one of the main priorities during the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council. So that's something we have been working on and trying to make progress. So maybe both questions would be mostly to Michael and David. So you are free to address them in the order you would like.
Okay, I'll have a go at that, and then I'll hand over to David, who I probably can answer it much more wisely than I can. But certainly, I think I mentioned in my last answer that getting access to people to broadband is really going to be crucial here. I mean, it is clear in the economy that we have now, particularly with distances involved in the Arctic, you cannot operate at all unless you have good connectivity. So this is something that we're going to look at. The issue that the European Union will have is that We have to look at where the competence lies between the European Union institutions itself, the business community who are providing these services, and the national authorities. We will certainly do all that we can in our revision of our Arctic strategy to accentuate the importance of decent broadband. And I know that there are, for example, when I was in Iceland, there was a project, an EU project, which actually put Wi-Fi hotspots in Reykjavik. So there are possibilities to do this. Whether it can be done on such a grand scale is something that we will have to look into. But seeing Jorn on the webinar here, I was having a meeting with some Norwegian colleagues just the other day who told me that the coverage up in the high north of Norway is far better than it is in Brussels. So it shows that it can be done. I think that's an important point. In terms of the Arctic Business Council, I think it's I mentioned earlier that we've been speaking to the business communities from the Nordic countries, our Nordic member countries, and there is a feeling that perhaps not enough has been done to listen to the voice of business. And so I would certainly be in favor. We had a long discussion about the Arctic Economic Council, the sort of sister organization to the Arctic Council. I will certainly be taking up contact with them. I've got a very excellent policy document from the Nordic business organizations, and I think we have to make the point that while climate change and environmental protection are extremely important parts of and key parts of what we do in the Arctic, because it's something where the European Union has real global leadership, we also have to bear in mind that it's not all about that. It's about making sure that people have livelihoods too. So I've got an open ear to this, and obviously we have now set a fantastic agreement between ourselves and Canada, and anything that can be done to sort of stimulate not only the fact that this is now up and running and really happening, but to stimulate concrete effects from that agreement has to be encouraged.
Thanks a lot, Michael. David Sproul?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. On this question of the effectiveness of the Economic Council, or sometimes described as the Business Council, I think there was a general feeling that it had not been as active and as it might be. This was set up under the Canadian chairmanship some years ago of the Arctic Council. So last October, they brought the Economic Council leadership together with the Arctic Council leadership to look at ways that we could perhaps make it a little bit more effective and sort of build on each other's work. I think that has begun. One thing that will be necessary is, I think, much broader membership in all the member countries to ensure that there is buy-in and participation by at least the key business sectors. But I think that there's good prospects for that. But it does bring me to this other question. That is interestingly enough, at last October's meeting in Reykjavik, there was a discussion of broadband in the north and across the circumpolar north. And I think there was a recognition that it is inadequate, particularly, I would say, in the North American north, and perhaps less so in some of our countries, such as Norway and the Nordic countries. But so there was a long discussion of the gaps where we can fill them. I think there was a general realization that there had to be government involvement, given the really high cost of providing adequate services for Northerners. And incidentally, our Prime Minister has just announced $2 billion to improve broadband in the north and our rural areas. So there's a recognition by our government of that. But I think that recognition spans the circumpolar Arctic. But it's a particularly big issue for countries like Canada, where the gaps are so large, the population is so small, and the costs of implementation are so great. But it is a priority.
Thank you very much. We received a number of questions relating to security matters, and where the Norwegian's perspective will also be asked to. So, Jon, if you feel there's anything on the questions we've been just through that you would like to address, you can just do it at that point. I have 3 questions that I would group into security related that I will just read out. We have one from Don Gibson. How can Canada cooperate more with Norway on Arctic maritime security? So that's to Jon and David. We have one from Andrea Charon. Do the panelists think that it might be time for a EUs-like agreement, the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, for the Arctic? So a EUs-like agreement for the Arctic as a confidence-building measure to ensure incidents or accidents at sea do not escalate tensions. So here we again, incident and accidents at sea, where we want to avoid how it escalates into unforeseen and unintentional tensions. And the last one relating to security is from Ron Hubert at University of Calgary. How will the EU and Norway new policies respond to the changing US Arctic policy, the Pompeo Doctrine, and rising threat of hybrid warfare in the region? And I think I will give our Norwegian colleague, Ambassador Designate of Norway, Jon, a chance to start on these 3 security-related questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hanne. Tough questions, of course, and questions that probably doesn't have a final answer to any of them. I mean, to start with the question of cooperation, if we talk about security and not only safety, I think both for Norway and Canada, it's an obvious fact that we are both NATO allies, and the North Atlantic is very much part of the operational area for NATO. So in that sense, I mean, we are both members of an organization that does take responsibility for security in the north, and as we see it, the operational area goes well into the Arctic. That doesn't mean by any means, as I have already said, that we would like to have a confrontational line with anyone in that area. It's extremely important that what we do is predictable, and we have said, you know, for many years that Norway is the eyes and the ears of NATO in the north, which means that we are when we have a presence in the area, and we work closely with our NATO allies on that. So again, there is mechanisms for that, and that obviously also include our ally Denmark. Now, if Norway and Canada could do more bilaterally on the maritime and the marine side, that's a good question. I think that's something we should always, you know, be open to, and I think the Arctic dialogue between our 2 countries can be developed further. So I'd love to also hear David's view on that. As for the more intricate question on how we respond to the US doctrine, I'm not sure what the US doctrine is supposed to mean. I mean, the United States is a member of the Arctic Council, as is Norway and as Canada, and that's a forum for discussing all kinds of cooperation and issues that we have in the Arctic, but we have a good tradition for not bringing in security questions in the Arctic Council as such. And I think it's important that we stick to that we use the Arctic Council for what it's meant to be. As I understand it, the US administration is now looking into also, as we are, and as Canada is, to the Arctic strategy, working on some new ideas, and we look forward to hear them when they're ready. So, I mean, again, for us, this is very much a question of cooperation and not responding to certain doctrines or speeches or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jon. David, would you like to address some of these issues?
Well, thank you. Insofar as cooperation, marine cooperation with Norway and others on safety, Canada is very actively engaged on that. In fact, there is a working group which takes up that issue at the Arctic Council, namely the Emergency Preparedness and Prevention Response Working Group, which looks exactly at how to increase preparedness and respond to emergencies, which is particularly relevant now with climate change and the loss of ice cover and the opening up of both the Northeast Passage, but also the Northwest Passage. So we expect to see much more traffic, both for commercial reasons, but even for tourist reasons as well. But to the issue of US policy, I'll sort of hold off comment there. I will say that Canada is about to begin another round of very close consultations with the United States insofar as Arctic issues are concerned. It will also discuss security. It's well known that Canada and the United States have traditionally allied together to provide security in our north and our Arctic regions, and that kind of cooperation will continue and be enhanced, particularly with new developments where we expect a much more active presence in the north of various sorts. And that kind of security cooperation just doesn't extend to hard security, but also soft security. And that gets us back to assisting in terms of, oil spill accidents, safety problems, emergency preparations, and that is vitally important for the health and security of our North American North. And I know those issues are shared insofar as European North are concerned too.
Yeah, Hannah, if I could come in and really echo what my colleagues have said there. I mean, the starting point for the European Union, I think, is fair to say I've been involved in a lot of similar events to this in the last few months, and there, from the think tank community and from the journalistic community, there is a lot of hype about the potential for conflict in the Arctic. We don't really see that. I mean, obviously we shouldn't be naive and we shouldn't be inattentive. But in fact, the Arctic regions have been marked by very good international cooperation. It is still, in practical terms, an area of low tension and of good cooperation. We have a few issues, obviously, with Russia in many parts of the world, but on a day-by-day practical level, the other speakers have mentioned the good cooperation in the Arctic Council. We have a thing called the Northern Dimension policy framework, where we do good hands-on work on environment, on transport, on people-to-people contacts with Russia. So I think we need to be a little bit cautious about getting carried away about the potential for a flashpoint in the Arctic. A lot of what is happening in the Arctic from our perspective is a reflection more on posturing from other parts of the world, perhaps. And for us, partly because of the powers that we have in Arctic policy, but partly because this is the way we think that it really is. The clear and present danger at the moment for the Arctic in terms of security is the danger posed by climate change. So that is where we're focusing our efforts. It doesn't just, and David mentioned soft security issues. The effects of climate change do lead to infrastructure collapsing because the permafrost is thawing. It does lead to potential environmental disasters. So we need to take a broader definition of what safety and security means. And we've also mentioned search and rescue. Search and rescue capacity is lacking. There has been a lot of good cooperative work on this, but still there are vast areas in the Arctic where if a military vessel, a fishing vessel, a cruise liner were to get into trouble, there would be a problem. So this is something that we really need to work on. Again, the question about the US, I mean, we have extremely good practical day-by-day cooperation with all of our Arctic partners, the US included. So, I would think that the most important thing that we need to focus on from our perspective is dealing with the real danger posed by climate change at the moment. And we hope that everyone will get on board with the Paris Agreement and with with really having ambitious goals to try and slow this down.
Just come in and 1 minute. Very much agree with Michael on that, and I would like to bring in one more perspective, which is not linked directly to security as such, but it's also about at least safety, and it's about economic development, and that is the blue economy. Of course, as the ice is retreating, there will always be the questions of what that means in terms of economic development, not only in terms of environmental safety. From the Norwegian side, we have this global initiative on blue economy. My Prime Minister is heading a high-level panel with 14 heads of state, including Prime Minister Trudeau, which look at blue economy globally and how to create a sustainable blue economy. And that also includes, of course, the Arctic areas. And we will, of course, need to have a discussion in the future of how to manage resources and marine resources in the north. And I think it's important also that we have a sort of a wider global outlook on that, and that we address the issue of having to create a sustainable blue economy, which is not all about protection, but it's all about exploiting the resources there, but do it in a very, very careful and sustainable manner. And I think we must do away, as we have already done around the table here, away with the idea that there is sort of an empty area and a race for resources into the Arctic. There is not. As we have already said, all of us, there are a lot of mechanisms where that makes it possible for us to deal with these issues in a very civilized way.
Thank you very much. Time is running when you discuss important things. So what I will suggest is that we do the last round of questions. They are a mixed bundle, and I'll read them out, and then each of our speakers will have a chance to address some of them. And then it would be in the order of David, Jon, and then Michael. You will end this last question session. I have one which is, I think, most directly to Michael. From A. Sharon: has EU forgiven Canada for saying no to its bids for observer status on the Arctic Council? That's one of them. We have one more to Norway, maybe. Norway's security policy rests on balancing assurances with deterrence, which runs into tensions as NATO allies push for greater military presence in the high north. Does Norway decide when, where, and how to contribute to regional military exercises given this policy? So it's relating more to military exercises in the north. There's one relating to the EU's release a series of policy papers where it repeated its position that the northern waterways are international straits. And there was a reference to, among others, the Northwest Passage. Is this still the position of the EU? And so why does this challenge the Canadian position? We're getting tougher and tougher here as we go along with the questions. I have two remaining ones. So I know you won't be able to address all of them, but just so that all the themes are out there. I have one from Anastasia Koroleva. From Canada and the EU perspective, can further collaboration with Arctic partners such as Russia on common challenges, for example, climate change, environmental protections, socio-economic development, serve as a way to diffuse the security dilemma through increasing interdependency? This topic has been addressed, I think, by some of you, but here it is again, if you would like to come back with more detail. And then the last one on sustainable development from Emily Donnelly. Can we hear more on both environment and the local sustainable development, and how circumpolar states plan to reconcile this with indigenous rights? Food security being a problem in Canada, and Sweden and Finland as EU members who still not ratify the ILO Convention in 169.
Well, thank you. As you said, there are a lot of those questions. I think we have touched upon most of them directly or indirectly already. As for the direct question to me on security, again, I'm not sure the question is relevant as such. The idea that there is a arms race coming into the Arctic region, that's not how we see it, and that's not the case at all. I don't see that there is any sort of, in our case, in the NATO ally disagreement on this issue at all. I mean, we have a clear NATO policy of as was stated, of both reassurance and deterrence in the north, and that's what we're doing. I mean, end of story. So I really see no reason to go more into that, as I don't feel that the question was perhaps well guided. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, those are lots of questions and tricky ones as well, and I'll try and be as quick as possible. On the, there was no question of needing to forgive. We had a difference of opinion on this issue. It's been sorted out. Now, on a practical level, we're not observers to the Arctic Council officially, the European Union. And we would prefer to be. We've made an application. However, we are still able to make a very practical contribution to the work of the Arctic Council, many working groups, many task forces. So in practical terms, our non-observer status or non-official observer status hasn't held us back. And I think our work is valued, I think, by our Arctic Council partners. So that is, a good news story, I suppose. And we also have now got the exemption for the seal products. That was the solution to the problem that we had with Canada. That's a long time ago. That's in the past, and we're, as I've said before, we're very close to Canada on everything, particularly in the Arctic. In terms of sea passages and so forth, the bottom line is we're great believers in the law of the sea. I think I'll leave it at that. And in terms of the sustainable development, I tried to touch on it earlier when my camera unfortunately went down. But basically, we do have, we recognize that there is a need to help local communities in order to make their livelihoods viable in Arctic regions. And that's why we're going to look at connectivity issues, but we also have these programs. I mean, I looked up in the last couple of minutes, and some of the projects that we've been able to finance, cross-border projects in Arctic regions, helping people to do environmentally friendly tourism. Obviously, tourism has been badly hit by COVID, but hopefully that will come back. Allowing craft businesses to develop what they do and to export their products, establish markets in Europe, helping with the provision of public services. So there are European programs available to allow small businesses in remote regions to operate environmentally. And I'm talking too much, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And luckily, we got a lot of strong points through from David earlier on. So I will hereby conclude the question and answer session. I think what we have seen clearly in today's webinar is a very strong and dedicated shared agenda between Norway, EU, and its 3 Arctic states, Sweden, Denmark, and Canada, of course. I think we have seen that the geopolitical framework is there. It creates challenges that we are dealing with, but there's a lot of very concrete cooperation going on with a focus and a starting point in the people living in the Arctic. We share similar agendas, and I think that makes us very close, but also necessary allies in keeping a strong and constructive dialogue going on in the Arctic, because we are more and more endangered and challenged by climate change. So there are no magic tricks. It takes hard work, it takes investments, and I think it takes a political choice to actually engage ourselves in the Arctic and continue finding solutions on how we move on as the Arctic is also moving. And we have many relevant tools. We have the Arctic Council, the Business Council. We have binding agreements on search and rescue, oil spill and science. We have coast guards that are cooperating. So we have a lot of strong tools. We just have to remember them and use them. So I wish to thank very much our speakers of today. You have delivered excellent, mutually supportive, you've shown mutual supportive partners. And I think there's an inspiration to continue exploring overlapping priorities and goals between our Arctic work. I would also like to thank the audience for your participation, your many good and tough questions. And of course, your interest in the Arctic is crucial and important if we're going to continue strengthening a good understanding of this fantastic region. I hope that today's seminar, kindly organized by the EU delegation to Canada and the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, will inspire to even closer Arctic cooperation together with the peoples of the Arctic, both on foreign policy, infrastructure, satellite. There are so many important issues, but very much climate change that have been mentioned. For concluding remarks of today's webinar, it's now a pleasure to pass the floor to Mr. Robert Haig, a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, previous and engaged and experienced successful Canadian diplomat who served, among others, as ambassador to Hungary, Slovenia, and deputy head of the Canadian mission to the EU. Robert, you're also known for your academic work, including on Canada-EU relations, and you teach modern diplomacy at the University of Ottawa. So for concluding remarks, the floor is over to you, Robert Haig. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think it's already been, the point's been made that the webinar can also be seen in the context of the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which had its 3rd anniversary just 2 weeks ago. It is also the anniversary of its companion, the Strategic Partnership Agreement, which is, in the words of the agreement, inspired by the long-standing friendship between the people of Europe and Canada. And that agreement provides for political, economic cooperation at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. These two relatively new agreements provide a long-sought foundation for Canada-EU relations. While our Arctic cooperation is rightly centered on the Arctic Council, it is useful to note that the SPA also opens the door to dialogue on certain circumpolar issues. I certainly won't make any attempt to try to summarize the discussion today, but I was struck by how much we can do together, particularly on climate change, and also the consensus that was evident in our speakers of the need to work with the Indigenous peoples. I've even heard of proposals for an Arctic Development Board, Arctic Development Institution, which should be built on the Norway model, a development bank, which would take into account the needs of Indigenous peoples. As a fellow of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, I would also like to extend my thanks to the European Commission in Brussels and at the delegation level here in playing a central role in organizing this very useful webinar. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers, Ambassadors Mann and Fredrickson and David Spruill, for their contributions, and you, Ambassador Eckhart, for the moderator's skills that you've so ably demonstrated. And you've already thanked our audience. Obviously, if you do this again, you'll need an hour for questions, I would think. And one final note, today is the German Embassy. The German Embassy is commemorating 30 years of German unity with Canadian partnership. It's hard to imagine it's already been 30 years. Bon anniversaire, Germany. Thank you.
Forward to seeing you out there and in the Arctic. Have a nice day.